So this is just a little intro into Bootstrap's Utility API. If you're not familiar with it, what it is a SAS-based method of generating all the utility classes. I'm not sure if it's technically a true API. It's really just an enormous SAS map and a bunch of functions. So if you looked at earlier versions of Bootstrap, like I have 4.6.2 here, they did use some SAS, like a for each loop, to generate some of the utilities, but then a lot of others were generated the longhand method, like all these border colors. And that's really similar to what you see in a lot of the custom themes that we've been doing, where we're declaring all of these background positions and text colors and sizes and font families the longhand way, I guess the longhand way. Whereas we could be utilizing the utility API to generate them for us. And what it does is it streamlines the output by putting everything into a large SAS map named utilities that's stored in just the utilities.sas file in the main Bootstrap directory. And then that map gets passed into all the mixins and such that are used in the utilities API file that's nested in that utilities folder. So this is just a little look at how it's structured. Each group of utility classes that it outputs is represented with a nested map of options. So like for your flex shrink property down at the bottom, the third one, you've got the option of it's responsive, you're naming what CSS property you're looking at, what class you want it to output, and then your different values. Now you can set a variety of different properties. Only ones that are required are the key or the CSS property that you're working with and values. Just hit my mouse there. Property is the CSS property that utility class will control, like your margin, opacity, position, and your values, which you can do in just a basic list. You can do it in a map, kind of like the theme colors are done in Bootstrap, or you can just use a variable that contains either your list or that map from somewhere else. Other common options are responsive, and this is a Boolean property, so it's either true or false. If it's true, it'll generate the breakpoint specific classes like the margin utility shown on the right. You can also use the class property to change the prefix that's used in the compiled CSS. And if you don't set this, it just uses the property name. So again, with this margin one, you can see it's setting the class of M, and that's why you end up with M dash instead of margin dash.
Quick question. So if you tell it to use the responsive, if you set that to true, it's going to output all of those variations, giving you the -0, -1, -2, -3. So you have all of those utilities to work with.
Right. You're going to end up with the margin or the M dash small, M dash medium, dash large, all those different breakpoints that are defined in the grid system.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
If you set it to false, you'd end up with just M-0-1, and there'd be nothing for like breakpoint specific.
Gotcha. Okay.
If you check out the documentation, there are more options that you can set, like you can tell it to generate CSS custom properties or variables instead of utility classes, and that's kind of neat. I didn't have a good example because Bootstrap's not really doing that right now, but it is an option you can leverage if you needed to output a whole bunch of like color theme properties.
How is this an improvement from like how you maybe would have done it before, Laura?
What is that? I'll show you. I will show you. Really, it just makes it faster.
Okay.
But you can leverage it in 3 ways. You can either remove some of Bootstrap's utilities, you can add your own classes, or you can modify all the default values or default class names. So instead of writing things out longhand, you could add the things that you want to be utility classes to that giant utilities map. And to do so, you would just need to put it in your, like we use the skin.sas file. So somewhere between where you're importing Bootstrap's utilities map and where you're importing the utilities API. So just so that that map already exists, and you're adding your changes, and then you're running it through. The easiest thing to do is to remove different things that you're not using. And I don't know if it's more of a benefit to remove them in this step, like as you're compiling the CSS, or to do it after the fact with like a purge CSS and basing it on what you're actually utilizing. I don't really know, but this does give you the option to get rid of some of those utilities that are just adding extra weight. Easiest way is just a 1-line using the map remove function. It's a built-in SAS function where you're just taking your utilities map and saying get rid of the width and float options. You can also do it with the slightly more complicated map merge function, which is you're redeclaring essentially the utilities map, but you're saying that the width and float properties are null. So it's really just another way of saying the same thing. But there is a benefit to this slightly longer hand method when you get into like adding your own utilities. I'll show that in a sec. Now to add, you would use the map merge function. Start with a unique key, like my custom utility. Specify what property you want to work with. And I struggled to find one that Bootstrap doesn't already have. So we're going with the text decoration style, which is one I rarely ever use. Then declare what values you want to output utilities for. So in this case, I'm using solid, dotted, and wavy. And you can set any of the additional options if you want to. Like I set a class property of decoration because I didn't want to put text decoration style in the class name. And then once everything's compiled, you end up with these ta-da, brand new utility classes, should you ever need to have a wavy underline on your text. You can also override what Bootstrap outputs out of the box. A couple different ways. Again, with the map merge, you can essentially just overwrite some of the things. So you can change like the align property originally has all these different values and you might not be utilizing all of them. You can change your class name to vertical align and just limit which of the properties you're outputting. And then there's combination of the map get and map merge functions. So you can modify an option without redeclaring all of them. Not really sure why you'd want to do this. I guess the best I can come up with is in case something's being added at a later point, or you just don't want to like redeclare everything. I'll show you why. Sec here. So you start with the normal map merge, so taking the utilities map and then merging it with your changes. specify what option you want to change. So changing the margin start utilities class. And here's where you start using the map get function. So you're looking at the utilities map and you're looking for the margin start property. So this is going to get from the existing one what it has. This gets so complicated. And specify the option you're changing. So in this case, we're changing the class name to margin left, which was the older syntax, ML instead of MS. Or you can get and merge the values. And it gets really complicated, like if you wanted to just change, I want more with utilities, I want to add maybe like a 10% in this. And if you don't want to rewrite all of the existing values, you have to use the map get function to get them, and it gets really nested in here. You've got 2, 3 map merges and a 2 map gets. So trying to get like all of the options for the width utility classes and then all the values. And then finally adding in your own. So that's just to add a 10% thing. I don't think anyone will ever utilize this. But if you wanted to just, I would say most likely what we would do is use a single map merge function, and you can remove things you're not using pretty quickly. And then if you are adding any of your custom things, I don't really know when we would ever need to remove anything. I don't know what you guys feel about removing it at this compiling stage or like after the fact, but it is an option. I do think it's really useful though for generating your own classes or just adding, like we need another font style property, family property. You want like a serif font instead of writing out those classes the longhand way. But overall, as I explored this, I really just felt like it was complicated to change a lot of the values. So really powerful, but also like really, it almost feels like you're writing more code to avoid writing some CSS the longhand way.
I didn't
Was
realize.
there? Go ahead, Chris.
Oh no, go ahead.
Well, I was just curious because I haven't looked at this at all. Like, did Bootstrap have any messaging like or guidance like this is why we did this, this is why, or you're just sort of trying to figure it out based off their documentation, Laura?
They say it's supposed to be a more streamlined method of doing it, and I do see it's a more programmatic approach to it, as opposed to writing everything longhand and maybe forgetting something, but definitely modifying their utility classes gets a little cumbersome.
Yeah, I could see a lot of use for them as a framework developer. Like they need to go in and build all of these utility classes. So they built something to be able to do that. And then now they have like a way that you can start to modify it yourself, like in the code that you're using.
Yeah.
I think the ability to pull out some of the classes is pretty cool. Like the width utility class, not something that we probably use. I don't know that if I've ever used it. And so like it's telling it not to compile it, I think is pretty cool. But I'm also very bad at remembering to do something like purge CSS to go through and remove markup for me. So like I think if we had similar things that we know we're not going to use, excluding that from the build just is kind of an automatic thing because it's in the boilerplate, it's doing it for us. Is this similar to how you would handle like modifying the like alert components that are built. Like I don't want 5 different color variations of alert. We only need 2. We need a success and an error.
Yeah, unfortunately, the alerts aren't using the utility API, but it's kind of a similar process because it is generated by looping through the theme colors map.
Mhm.
So you could kind of do the same thing as, there's the very early, easy way of doing it. You could just take and make this be theme colors and map remove, and you could say get rid of success or info, and then it would get rid of the buttons of that color, the alerts of that color, everything.
And so would this be the preferred area where you make that change instead of updating your, what's that variable where it stores out the color mappings?
Theme colors.
Theme colors, okay. So like, is it preferred to do it in theme colors, redefining that variable, or updating it through the utility API?
Well, the utility API doesn't generate like those alert ones.
Right, okay.
But that theme colors map or variable that contains a map is used for a lot of the utilities. So I guess just keep in mind that if you're removing it for buttons, you're also removing it for text color and link color and all kinds of other things.
Gotcha, right, because this is generating the utility classes, not the components, so to speak. Okay.
Yeah, and as I went through Bootstrap's documentation, like it sounded like a really cool thing to just be like, oh, well, you can add another value. Like I want my opacity to be 10% instead of 50% to this utility, but like their way of doing it is so intense. I don't know if I would ever do it.
Yeah, I was kind of looking, one of the screenshots you had was like the Orchid site, I think, where I had probably like 12 different border colors, and like it's tedious. It was tedious to set up, but it's never changed, and it's probably more lines of code to do all of the map merges, getting the properties, updating the property, and then finally getting it set. But that color naming process was awful because you keep finding more shades of gray. And it was just,
is it this
yeah,
one here with the border colors?
I'm sorry for everyone's eyes.
I mean, you could add those border colors to like their own map and then merge that into the theme colors. Like, but I don't know if overall you'd really be saving any lines of code. I was hoping this would be like the magic thing that would save us so much time, but I ended up feeling really discouraged as I dug into the code.
I know there's well, first, I guess, seems like this might be useful for a lot of the color properties. You don't necessarily want the same set of colors to be defined for each one. It sounds like it might be useful for defining which colors should be available for which utility, maybe. Which, especially like Bootstrap 5.3 has a new utility that sets the background color and a calculated contrasting text color at the same time using the same class. So stuff like that might be useful to set what colors you can use with that, so you can use it more often.
Zoom in here.
That's just my initial impression, I guess.
Yeah, I could see that, honestly. Like, do you remember what that one was called?
I know it was in that Word document, and I can find the Word document in like 2 seconds, so 1 second.
Is it like BG text or something like that?
Something like that.
A lot of the things that I was hoping were done with this utility API weren't. So like buttons are not, and then pretty much a lot of other things that we customize regularly are not. It really is just utilities.
Yeah, it's text BG color. So assuming that can be customized using the utilities,
It's not
that might be
in-
useful.
Oh, they do it here in another, outside of that utilities API. It's in a helpers file.
Oh. Okay.
So it is just looping through the theme colors. So I guess, I don't know, I really wish that they'd use different maps for them, like theme colors for most of it maybe, but then maybe you could have your own map of like, I want these to be my background colors, because maybe I never want the primary color to be a background for anything. I could definitely see having different maps, but
I know the entire color system was like completely rewritten, so
it looks like that they're going to be redoing it in Bootstrap 6. There was a note on
5.3 was like a half step.
yeah,
Or like half rewrote everything and they're trying to finalize it in 6.
I think so, yeah.
So
Because I was reading about these new colors and how they're doing like the tertiary background color, and there's all these different new custom CSS properties, but I don't know if this was always here or if they just added it, but saying there's potential confusion, and so expect it to be ironed out in version 6.
that was there when I was looking at it, and it's definitely still an issue in the code currently because the secondary variable is still in place where it always has been, but now it's just gray, which not as ideal.
Yeah, so I almost don't want to mess with their new color system until they iron out those confusion points in the new version.
Yeah.
I'm kind of curious how much extra code is now shipped with Bootstrap in 5.3, like without doing any code cleanup versus the previous version where they added all of these like color variations. Because they added that to cards, right? The cards all have like background color options now, and as they continue to add more and more, I mean, you should be using some purge and cleaning up your CSS so you ship with less, but like Bootstrap's biggest criticism, I think, is probably like the size of it, and especially compared to like Tailwind. And if they're just shipping more and more, it makes it easier to develop to, but if you're not making sure you're going through and cleaning it, you just have a larger file.
Might be a good thing to compare. I do believe a lot of the color theming stuff was done in a way that it shouldn't increase the file size much.
Yeah, they do it mostly with just CSS custom properties, which
they made CSS variables available for most things in the platform. So that if you need to like have a completely separate color scheme that you apply to some things, you just basically target the name of that scheme that you apply to a custom like BS theme attribute, and then you just overwrite the CSS variables, and you'll have to like actually overwrite the CSS itself.
Yeah,
gotcha.
So I downloaded Bootstrap 4.6.2, the compiled versions, and the unminified version's 200 kilobytes. And then in 5.3.1, it is 281.
281?
Mm-hmm. So they added 81 kilobytes.
I actually wonder how it would compare with the way we do it in the boilerplate, where we just have most of the things commented out unless we actually use them.
Yeah.
I know when I was trying it just with playing with the utilities API, if I got rid of all of the utilities out of there, it reduced my overall file size by 72 kilobytes. So it's not a huge difference, but I could probably hear the Tailwind proponents saying like, well, that's my entire style sheet. So.
Yeah.
Be sure to like this video and subscribe to our Gorilla Learning Lab. We have a lot more banana tidbits for you to get ape over. Check out our other videos or visit our website at www.10poundgorilla.com. I'm swinging on out of here.
Ooh, ooh, ah, ah! Ooh, ooh, ooh! You're not subscribed? That's bananas!